Hello. Welcome to today's episode of the Greene County Podcast. I'm Ben. This is Bob. Today's program, we're going to kind of try to tackle the who we are and what is our background and, a little bit into that. So I think we're going to start with who we are and what's our background. I think we'll start with you, Bob.
I'm Bob. If you ain't figured it out and can't tell by looking, I'm 60 years old. I grew up in church, started going as soon as I was born. That was up to my mama, not me. I was saved when I was 16 years old. It was a revival. Paul Ragland was the preacher then. At that, he preached on Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourself, lest any man should boast. It's not of works. Real quick, and I'll go more into this, but I'd been being convicted for a while. I didn't come to the altar at church. I went home, had the meeting with God at home. I stayed in church for, some time after that. Like a lot of young people, I got out of college and got out of God's will and got out of church. That lasted for some time. To begin with, it wasn't that bad. It got worse at times as far as the sin that I was in. About 24 years ago, probably, I got right with God. Was going to a small church. Went there for a while, actually got remarried there. We stayed for several years there. That's really, to this day, I'd call that my home church, because the first one was long before that. We stayed until the church had a problem. We helped to get a new pastor. They treated the pastor, let me rephrase that. The pastor, by some people, got treated very badly. We stayed through that until they finally succeeded these people finally succeeded in running the pastor off. When they finally ran the pastor off, we left too. We didn't go with that pastor. We actually went to a larger church in Paragould. We didn't join there immediately. We'd been going for a while and we're involved and knew people, part of the congregation. And one of the deacons, I believe it was, asked me one Sunday morning, he said, "When are y'all going to join the church?" And I told him, "So we're waiting to see y'all get a pastor." And he said, "Yeah, there's a lot of people waiting to see what kind of pastor we get." I says, "Oh, no, you don't understand what I mean. I'm waiting to see how you treat the pastor you get." Well, a year later, they got a pastor. Year after that, they'd run the pastor off. And we left at that time. And at some point, I'll go through this a little more slowly and share the lessons that I learned. When we left the first church, I thought I learned a lesson, and I did. When we got to the end of the second church, I learned an additional lesson on top of that one that kind of modified the first one. From that point, we went to another church, and we're very involved in that church. And I don't have a lot to say about that now. I will probably later. But we wound up having to leave that church because of ideological differences. We went to a quite small church for some time until actually we wound up going back to the original church that we went to. And I think you kind of told this story or will tell this story later. I may be out of sequence here, but we went back and people loved us and we loved people. I mean, we knew them and it was their family. And we stayed there for a couple of years, actually, I think. And finally, it became apparent that that wasn't where God wanted us. And the reason it came apparent that he didn't want us there was that the church showed us that they were not willing to grow or to move. They were where they were going to be. And that's a sad situation that so many churches find themselves in these days and have for years. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to say about that. From there, we went to a big church. We're now have been for the last 2-3 years, have been going to Nettleton Baptist in Brooklyn or Jonesboro. I really can't say enough good about them. There's bad things about them, I'm sure. I just hadn't found them. One bad thing about them is I go there. So that's kind of my church history. I have had, when we were at the initial church, I taught, not initially, but there came a point I taught Sunday school class. I actually helped start a training union class that I taught, a topical theology class. We had several other classes. That went on for, I think, a couple years until the pastor left unexpectedly and basically the church exploded. And ever since that time, I have had a burden to teach and to share, and not so much to teach all this knowledge that I have, because I don't. There's a lot of people that know a lot more of things than I know, but in my job over the last 30 years, I have had to work really hard at thinking through things and looking at things in a unbiased way and figuring out solutions for things. I mean, my whole day for years was solve one problem after another, after another, after another. And you don't do that without learning some things. And I'm going to touch on this right now because it kind of is one of the areas that I want to focus on and that I feel led to focus on, and that is the shortcomings of today's church. And we'll probably have an episode called Church Complaints. And our church complaints, my church complaints, are not going to be church hurt. I've never been church hurt. I've never been anywhere that I walked away and said, well, if they're going to do that, I ain't going to, well, I take that back. I have been places, if they're going to behave like that and obviously do unchristian things, then I'm not going to be a part of that. But I have never been offended anywhere I have gone. No one has ever offended me. I'm not a snowflake, so they probably could have done things that I could have been offended by. That's just not who I am. That's not in my personality. But we are going to complain about things and the ways church does things. In my case, in particular, it's going to have an emphasis on the education system of the church. Not from an adversarial or hateful attitude, but folks, these are the things that we need to address. These are the things that we need to change. This is how we can become what we need to be. And I'm sorry, but generally speaking, churches today are nowhere near what they should be and how they should be. And that's pretty much across the board. Again, the church I go to now, I have pretty rosy outlook on, and I really feel like that they're doing a lot of things right. I'm sure there's a lot of things they could do better. And that's what we want to address.
So, hey, my name's Ben. As I've stated at the beginning of these every single time. I come from a background where my grandfather was a retired Baptist preacher. Grew up in church my entire life. but I never had a relationship with Christ. I just didn't. I got baptized 2 or 3 times as a kid. Kept saying I did, but I didn't. And I lived in sin quite a bit. I met my wife when I was turning 16. I was homeschooled at the time, and she went to a public school. And through a mutual friend, I was able to actually meet her. And we got married when we turned 20 years old. And we've been married ever since. So we've been together since we were 16, been married since 20. And by the grace of God, He sent her in my life because she really was able to show me that while I wanted to say it with my mouth, I didn't want to live it with my life. I didn't want to actually be a Christian. And so I kind of went at it in a standpoint of I wanted to try to prove Christianity wrong. I did. I wanted to figure out the ins and outs to a point where I could convince myself that my sin was okay. That way I could continue sinning and not care. I didn't have to go to church. I didn't have to have a conviction. And that, led me in the opposite direction. It tend to really kick me in the tail and help jumpstart my faith walk, my journey of finding Christ and understanding His love for me. And I can go deeper into my testimony at a later time because it's going to be a little bit of a deeper one. But, I've had a supernatural encounter with God that really put on the fire under my butt to get going, because I don't want anyone to experience the desperation and fear and pain that I felt during the time that I lived in sin. I don't want to see another man put his wife through what I put my wife through. I can't stand to see it. My wife is a saint for sticking with me through the things that I did and said and thought and felt. And I don't want to see another man deal with that. I don't want to see another man have to put his wife through that. And so I really, when going into this podcast, I'm really, really focusing on coming from my standpoint of trying to prove Christianity wrong so that I could go sinning, to be able to reach the people who kind of may be in the same situation. I really want to be able to reach out and to give that arm outreach to that person, to be able to drag them in to understand who Christ is and His love. I really want to be able to also help grow the people that claim to be Christians, that say they are Christians, or that even, very much are Christians, not just claiming, but are Christians. I want to be able to help grow their faith and to be able to allow them to learn and to give them a place where they can come to for questions and things like that. I've been very, very blessed in my life, in both physically, mentally, and spiritually. I've been very, very blessed. But one of the things that God's also blessed me with here recently is the ability to preach from time to time. We've talked about it, and we may have some snippets of some of my sermons in future episodes. But that ability to preach has led to many, many things, many doors being opened, many learning opportunities happening, many opportunities within the church to be able to serve both on a kind of administrator capacity and in a teaching capacity and things along that nature. Throughout this faith walk, I've also been able to see my wife grow tremendously. It has been a blessing beyond all compare to be able to see my wife. She started a nonprofit through Southside, which is where we go to church, called Christian Corner, and it has just been an amazing help. And I'm in awe of seeing what God can do from here on out, both in my life and in my wife's life. And I want that for the people of this community.
Yeah, and I in particular am going to be very critical. Critical of things I see in church. I mean, if you look back in Scripture, who was Jesus the most critical of?
The ones that claim to be religious.
The ones that claim to be. And I'm not as concerned about the ones that claim to be as the ones that are. And my original burden for people basically is to help them grow. And the thing that I see lacking in today's world and in the church is just as bad, is just simply the unwillingness to think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, that sounds kind of ugly, but it's just the truth.
Yeah.
We're busy. We go through our day and we just want to get to the end of the day and we go to church and, not necessarily speaking for anybody, but this is a easy trap to fall into. You go to church, you sing some songs, you call yourself worshiping. You go to class and you're studying the Word of God. But it turns into just the same old thing over and over again.
Yeah, you're just checking a box.
You're kind of checking a box, and you're not really going to any depth.
Yeah. So I think our first question would be, how we got here, how we got to a podcast and kind of things like that. Let's dive into that one a little bit.
Okay. I'll kind of take credit for some of that anyway. And then
I think you should take credit for most of it.
Well, things just kind of fell in place. I have been struggling, honestly, for some time, last couple of years anyway, in how I can share the gospel, how I can share growth, call people to grow and help them do that. And, I have tried through Facebook, which is the biggest outlet, I guess, that I have had. And, maybe there's been some success. Every once in a while, somebody will say something of, I really appreciate you putting that on. Mm-hmm. But I don't, for instance, I'm actually doing a read the Bible in a year thing every day. I'll put the scripture on there for what today's reading. I'm actually doing an Old Testament, or actually doing a Old Testament one and a New Testament separately. So if you want to do both, you got to follow along with both. And originally I had started commenting on that, hoping for some discussion, and it's just really, really hard to get anybody to talk to you. It's hard to draw people into a conversation unless there's somebody there to have a conversation with.
Yeah.
And I'd thought about a podcast for a long time, all the way back to watching the episode of The Simpsons when I think it's been a long time.
Well, they've been on for a very long time.
But I think Homer had maybe got laid off or lost his job or whatever, and the podcast craze had just come along, I think, and he decided that he would do a podcast. And he thought that was great because he could do that in his underwear.
As long as you look appropriate from the waist up.
From waist up, and I always thought that was kind of funny, and I promise you we have our pants on. So that's been a long time ago, and I thought about, well, maybe we can do just a sound track, and in talking to one of the crew here, oh, no, we can do video too. That's no problem. Well, it turned out to be a fair undertaking, but we've undertook it, and here we are. So that's kind of, I had originally, I guess, just planned on doing this myself. Didn't particularly like that idea. I don't like hearing myself talk. I don't think that's the best episode. I actually, to be honest, I don't know if you know this, but I'd ask at least one, I think two other people if they would be interested in doing this with me. And they really weren't interested in that. And I kept thinking, who do I know that one would have the willingness to do this, the desire to do this, and the time to do this, because this takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We found that out, and we're not even really on the air yet, if you will. And I thought about you, and I'd given you some books earlier than you, and we talked about theology stuff, some anyway, and thought, well, I'll ask Ben, and I went and asked you, and you were thrilled. I think you were all for it.
Yeah. So. I was kind of So I had heard about that you had started a podcast from one of the gentlemen at work earlier on, and he said, I don't really know what it's about. I think it's going to be something religious. I just don't really know. And I'm like, man, I'd love to be on an episode one of these days. Because I love talking theology and just talking in general. I mean, you probably tell that. I don't shut up very often, but I enjoy it a lot. And so when you came to me and was like, hey, would you be interested in this? 100%. I'd love to be able to do this. And if even just a fraction of my words can be used to help somebody along the way in some way, shape, or form, man, I'd be thrilled.
Well, let me share a little bit about Ben with you. And one thing I really don't think I knew, Ben actually preaches some. In fact, we've got an episode coming up. We're going to feature part of that, and you may see some more of that along the way. Ben is very active in church. Ben's wife has a ministry. Why don't you tell us about that a little bit?
So she's got a nonprofit ministry that she started through our church here in Paragould. It's called Southside Community Church. The ministry is called Christian Corner. And what it is it's a personal hygiene outreach, more or less. And so what she did was she really felt God tugging on her heart to be able to start some form of nonprofit to help the people in the community that couldn't get things. And so, of course, first thing that pops in your head, food bank or, clothes, something along that nature. And so we went to our pastor at Southside. His name is Charles Stoddard. And we talked to him a little bit about some stuff. And he gave us some advice. He said, one of the first things I tell you to do is go to all the nonprofits that are here and ask them what's missing. Ask them what they need help with. And so that's what she did. She set up and she went to every nonprofit that she could find that was an outreach of some kind. And she spent 2, 3, 4 hours with them, talking to them, figuring out what it was that they thought that the community needed to fit in and to fill. And what she found the resounding need was a lot of people, when they would get into a natural disaster, such as their house caught on fire or something like that, or they would get through with a rehab or, whatever it might be, the biggest thing was they never had the money or the ability to buy just simple personal hygiene products. It was hard to get a hold of toilet paper. It was hard to get a hold of laundry detergent, of toothpaste, of toothbrushes, things along that nature. If they had kids, they would always put the kids first, get them toothbrushes and toothpaste and soap and stuff. And most of the time, mom and dad would just find the cheapest bar soap they could to try to wash up as best they could. And she noticed that was a resounding issue in the community, that they were really craving and needing some help with those needs. And so she started up Christian Corner. We've been able to have, I believe, 3 clinics is what we call them to this day. What we do is whenever it's open, we do a restock. We get everything built up in stock at the building. And then we open it up and we invite it to the public. Whoever wants to come, willing to come, we're open from, I believe we open 8 to 10 or 8 to 9 or something like that for people to come in and fill out their paperwork. Once they get their paperwork, while we're working on getting their supplies that they need, we actually take them back and they sit one-on-one with an evangelist. So each person that comes through that door will have a one-on-one moment with an evangelist to be able to talk about the gospel. If there's someone that is already a believer, they get to have prayer, a little prayer time, and they can fill out some prayer requests, stuff like that. But our goal is we want to be able to meet not only their physical needs, but also their spiritual needs. Right. And so through that, we've been able to have I don't even know the number of rededications we've had and things like that, but I do know that we've been able to have 3 salvations, 3 people that have never heard the gospel and wanted to give their life to Christ. We've had 3 salvations through our clinics, and we've been able to give out, I think, almost 50 or 60 Bibles through the helps of the Gideons as well. So that's a little bit about me and my wife. Like he said, I've had the ability to preach from time to time at Southside and things like that. I do feel called to preach and to teach in some capacity of some kind. And that's kind of how I ended up here,
Yeah, and that's perfect for this, because that's what, I'm not a preacher. We're not really going to be preaching here unless we share one of your sermons or something. But to teach and to share, I mean, that's what it's all about.
So I think that kind of leads us almost to our second point, doesn't it, that we had, which was why we're here. We kind of rolled into it a little bit.
Yeah. Before we get to that, let me mention this. One of the things that we will constantly be doing is trying to portray, encourage a culture of life and that is what that is about, what your ministry is about.
Yeah.
We'll also be promoting the Options organization here in Paragould. It's more places than that, but we actually have one here in Paragould,
And I believe there's one on Main Street in Jonesboro.
I believe,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
There's several of them around. I think there's one in Blytheville, several of them around, and this is a resource center for pregnant young ladies that may need some help and may be considering what their options are.
Yeah.
And we'll let you know a lot more about that. Also, the name of this podcast is the Greene County Podcast. Obviously, Greene County, Arkansas. And there's a couple of reasons that we wanted to do that, because one thing is that we want to proclaim the gospel. We want to help people grow. But as part of that, we want to help people understand how to live out a Christ-like life in Greene County, Arkansas.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it starts from home. You know, you can have grand aspirations of being able to reach millions and reach everybody that you want to, but if you don't ever start with your own community, you're doing a massive disservice, you know, and that's something that I've personally noticed around here, is that a lot of churches have focused on the grand scheme of planting churches in other places, or, you know, sending missionaries here, reaching out and doing this here and there and everything else like that. And there's nothing wrong with that by any means. There's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times our own communities will get kind of swept under the rug and lost in translation. And I think
even that church.
Yeah.
The churches get focused on going out and doing, and they often ignore the people right there with them.
Yeah. I think we've taken for granted the fact that we live kind of in the Bible Belt. Mm-hmm. And so we just see, oh, there's a church here, there's a church here, there's a church here, church here, church there. And we never think, just because there's a church there doesn't mean that nobody's not heard the gospel.
Right.
You know?
Well, that and the growth that's there. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, I think that a lot of times church folk,
which you will hear a lot about.
Hear a lot from me, assume that because someone goes to church, because they go to church, one, that they're saved, and two, that they're where they need to be with God. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you. You can answer this question, but I'm not where I need to be with God.
No.
And very few people are.
Yeah. I said no in response to you, and I don't want it to sound like I'm saying, no, you're not where you're supposed to be. I'm agreeing with you, and no, I'm not as well. You know, I think our walk with Christ is a continual thing. From the day that we accept Christ and come to know Him to the day that we die, we will always be growing, we will always be ever-changing, and we will always be learning more and more and more.
In fact, and I've told this several times when I would tell various stories about churches that I have been to, and the one I'm going to now is no exception to this. The people in class with me in particular, which I can't make very much of a judgment, if you will, and there's a topic for us. We need to talk about judgment. Are we supposed to judge or not? But I can't judge the heart at all. I can't judge where someone's at. I can't judge what they're trying to be and trying to do of people that are in the congregation. Mm-hmm. I can get a better feel for that for the 10 to 20 men that are in the class I go to on Wednesday night. Same way, prior church to that, I said this about people in the Sunday school class. In fact, it was small enough church. I really said it about
the congregation,
more or less everybody.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that these people are trying harder than I am to be better Christians than I am. In other words, they are working at this harder than I am. They are trying to do better than I am trying to do. And that's nothing more than me telling my failing, you know. But at the same time, I saw a lot of shortcomings not in the people, which we all people have shortcomings, but in the methods that they were using to get where they were trying to go.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot that you kind of notice someone trying to grow closer to God, and some people just try to strong arm it. They think that the more that they read, the more that they can do it, and that's not saying that's for everybody, but just an example, you can kind of see some people that think, I just got to be closer to God, and so they try to strong arm it instead of actually coming at it in the relationship standpoint.
Right.
They think of it more of an intellectual standpoint.
I do see that a lot. I see a lot of people that, I know I'm sinful and I'm struggling with this sin and I'm going to do better about this. And I'm asking God to help me with that. And I always go back to, you've got to grow the relationship and you've got to ask God and allow God to change your heart.
Yeah, you got to let go and let God.
Yeah, because one of the things that I always like to go back to also is Paul basically said, everything that you see in me that is wrong is me. Mm-hmm. Everything that you see in me that is good is Christ working through me. And I know of a personal experience that when God allows me to overcome something, I can always look back on it and, gee, how did that happen? I didn't do that. Mm-hmm. There is nothing that I have overcome or nothing good that I can do that I can look back on and say, yeah, I finally got to the point that I can handle that. Mm-hmm. It just don't work that way. It just finally God gives you victory in something, and all you can do is thank him for it and say he did it.
Yeah.
So anyway, back kind of on track, I think, if we can find the tracks from here. I've had a burden for a long time about people that I think are really trying to get closer to God and to learn and to grow. And our churches, and again, the church I'm going to now, which is Nettleton Baptist in Brooklyn, I guess, or Jonesboro.
Yeah, Brooklyn, Jonesboro. You kind of consider it either or.
It's a great church. I have nothing to say derogatory about them or anyone there. So far, we've been going a couple of years. Had a very good. In fact, we've had very good experiences. Peppered with some very sad experiences everywhere else that we have gone, and someday we may actually cover some of those, because I have learned so much at the various churches that I've been to over the years. I'm 60 years old. I grew up.
Not.
Yeah, Ben's what, 29?
29.
Or fixing to be 29.
Yeah.
And I'm 60 years old. I grew up in church. I didn't stay in church my entire life. I was saved when I was 16. I've been in church for the last 20 some odd years solidly. Not always been faithful within that time, but God has been faithful every day of my life. Mm-hmm. But I've been to a few churches in that time, and I've learned a lot every time that we have moved from one church to the other. I think our churches in general fail people in many respects. One respect is failure to disciple new believers.
Yeah.
So many times you see a new believer, and it seems like at Nettleton that they are pretty good at this. But in general, what I've noticed at churches is you have a new believer, and more times than not, they just kind of fade away. Mm-hmm. And there's no accountability, there's no encouragement, and there's no growth, expected of them or fostered in them.
I think that's partially due to a death of fellowship in the churches. That's a whole subject I do want to personally cover later on. I think that as technology has progressed and as things have progressed, we have dwindled down the importance of fellowship with one another.
Yeah, when I was growing up, and probably when you were very
wee
young,
tyke.
very young, it was Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and then you had revivals and so forth, and
You had classes throughout the week, Tuesdays,
yeah.
Thursdays, things like that.
That's just not the case anymore.
Yeah.
And I understand that, but if we're going to drop that aspect, we've got to make sure that we compensate for that.
Yeah. And I don't think this is a good compensation. I don't think just making something that we can post online. I'm saying in terms of the churches. I think a lot of people have gotten very comfortable with just going, I watched church on YouTube today. It's not the same. It's genuinely not the same. You miss out so much in the weeds is to truly explain our conviction onto, how we got here, why we're here, and kind of at times we're really going to kind of touch a little bit on why we feel that we might be qualified to help one way or another,
And, to that point, we're not.
Yeah, we're not.
I mean, we're not qualified. If you will, I don't feel like, and this may be arrogance, but I don't feel like I need somebody to hold my hand and help me figure things out.
Yeah.
For the most part. But I benefit greatly, and I greatly enjoy the time I spend in class with others talking and exploring things, because there's so many things that we talk about and that it makes me think about, and we explore that I would never do on my own because I just wouldn't ever get there.
Yeah. I think that kind of that speaks to the seasoned believer, not necessarily having to be taught, but having the willingness to be taught, in the sense of they don't go to a class going, okay, I need you to teach me stuff I don't know, rather than going to the class going, if you can teach me stuff I don't know, let's look at it. Yeah. That kind of understanding.
Well,
so
and this applies, what I'm about to say applies to several things that we've said. If you put a new believer with a more seasoned believer in a classroom and try to teach them together, you need to have a class set up so that there is enough conversation and the seasoned believer can speak to issues and the new believer can ask questions. And it's just like anytime I have ever been in a position of teaching something, okay, I've got to teach class this whenever.
Yeah.
I've learned more, I feel like, in studying and preparing for that than anybody under my teaching learned, probably. And I would even say that in the class I'm going to now, which is mostly a conversation class, that I learn a lot there thinking through what we talked through at the time.
Yeah.
If you look at students, if you will, in a class and a teacher in the class, you're right, the teacher's got to be prepared.
Yeah.
The student can just show up and listen or not listen, and that's one of the reasons that I am so adamantly anti-quarterly is because...
Okay. Let's stop there for a split second. Right. Let's explain quarterlies.
Quarterlies are, and Ethan's dad could do a better job of explaining this.
Let's just give it, because we've thrown it around a couple times. Let's just give what is a quarterly and why we don't like it.
All right, a quarterly basically is a booklet that comes out 4 times a year, thus quarterly. Ones I'm referring to, by the way, Baptist. My background is Baptist. I'm going to a Baptist church. That doesn't mean that necessarily that we think Baptists are the only way.
Yeah.
And I think
there may be things that the Baptists teach that I might disagree with.
That's right, me too.
For the main core fundamentals of what they teach and how they teach, I align more with Baptists than most denominations.
Anything else. Yeah. And you'll see us talk about some other denominations bordering on cults. Here we'll be as even-handed as we can with that, and as scriptural as we can with that. But basically, the Southern Baptist Convention, basically, I believe, invented the quarterly back in the 1800s. And one of their main reasons for that, which was a noble reason, was to help people learn how to read. Mm-hmm. And the problem with them today is I was going to, not the current church, but a church prior to that. It had 2 adult Sunday school classes. And it was, I was a few years younger, not many, but I was in the younger of the 2 classes. And I asked them one day to do a survey in both classes. I said, just ask the people in the class how many years you have went to Sunday school. How many years of Sunday school do you have? In our class, it was like 40 years.
Altogether culmination?
No, each person. The average person, there was...
You were in the youngest class, and the average person was 40 years.
Yes, sir. And there was like 10, 12 people in there. 2 visitors in there. Was about 40 years. The older class was in the 50, 55-year range. Okay, that was the old folks class. But here's a couple of points I want to make from that. The main point is we were doing a quarterly, and I believe that week or a week around that was Daniel in the Lion's Den. So here's my contention. If a person has been to 40 years of Sunday school, how many times have they had the lesson Daniel in the Lion's Den?
Yeah.
Maybe not 40. Let's just say 10. Probably more like 20, but anyway. So what did they cover? If they had Daniel in the Lion's Den 10 times over the last 40 years, did they cover 10 different aspects of that? Or did they cover exactly the same aspect every time? Mm-hmm. What they basically covered, I'll almost guarantee you, is here's the story of Daniel in the Lion's Den. See the faith that Daniel had.
And see the provision that God
had.
And
the provision that God made. And we need to have faith that God will have that provision. We need to have faith like Daniel.
Yeah.
That's what they have been taught 10, 20, 40 times.
Yeah.
And, quarterlies may be great. Maybe you can even make it up through the 12th grade. Maybe you can make the argument for that. I wouldn't make the argument for that back to your point, for kids that had become believers at, say, 10 years old, and now they're 18 years old. It's time to move on to some meat and taters instead of milk.
And I was going to kind of point to that because, now quarterlies aren't necessarily as prevalent, but study guides are still prevalent or kind of taking over the quarterly stance. And I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with a study guide. Don't get me wrong when I say this. I will say, though, depending on the context in with which they are being used, they can be a hindrance more than a help. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because I help teach a young adults class on the first and third Sunday of every month. And so we try to do it 2 to 3 times a month, and it's from ages 18 to 20, I don't feel like I'm a liar, 26, I think, is what we're doing. And it's to kind of target that age range of just out of high school, just coming into college, maybe just getting married, maybe just having kids, kind of that very wishy-washy years for a lot of people. And so anyway, we started it. We're trying to really capture that rough and tumble years and to really equip them to tackle life. And so we started a study guide because it was our first year of doing the class, and we thought, okay, we'll just do a study guide and kind of help. And it's supposed to be kind of a meat and tater style study guide. And it went through the Old Testament. It went through kind of Moses and it went through Abraham and Moses, and it kind of dove a little bit into David, and it kind of stopped there. And we were discussing on maybe picking up the second book where it continued on. But one of the reoccurring themes that we noticed is 9 times out of 10, it's a very discussion-based one where, me and the other teacher will sit there and we'll kind of teach over whatever the little lesson is or something like that. But we really just kind of pick it out and we start diving into it, And we noticed 9 times out of 10, both he and I and the class would rewrite the book. because we would sit there and we go, that's the point they made? Like that's it? Mm-hmm. We're reading this verse and they're going, see, Abram got his name changed to Abraham. Look at the faith he had to follow God. And we're like, I think we should point to the fact that before his name was changed to Abraham, he had the faith to uproot everything and walk. Like, you're skipping a large portion of this that proves to the fact that before God had provided for him, he just went up and went. He followed blindly in faith before the provision, knowing God's faith for him, or knowing God's faithfulness to what he said he was going to do. And so, kind of a little bit back to the point, I don't think necessarily study guides are a problem, but I do think it's really hard to find study guides that are going to get really deep into meat and potatoes, that are going to get into deep breakdowns, would be the best way to put it, They kind of just take a quarterly and they compact it into, how can I reword this in a fancy way? How do I have,
How can I make a list out of this?
Yeah, how can I make a list out of this? How can I ask the same question 6 different times? That was another reoccurring theme in the book we had. And it wasn't a bad book. I'm not trying to thrash on study guides or anything else like that. But they literally would ask a question, and it would be like, what do you see that Abraham had that God liked? And we'd be like, well, of course, his faith. And the next question would be like, almost rewording it, but the same answers. Well, his faith. It's like, okay, come on. We got to have something more here.
Yeah, and I think that when you come to something like that, you need to stop and make this observation. Abraham didn't have anything God liked.
Yeah.
God chose Abraham to do the work that he did in Abraham's life out of God's good pleasure.
Yeah.
And you can quote this as well as I can. I'll probably mess it up, but Ephesians 2:8-9. For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourself, lest any man should boast, is the gift of God.
Yeah. And
the gift of God there is faith.
Yeah.
And everything that we have, what we do with that faith may, let's don't get too far in the weeds, what we do with that faith may be our business, but we did not come up with the faith on our own.
No. And we just responded to it. Right.
And I'm going to stop anybody when they say something like that and talk about that, and not reproving you or saying you're wrong, but hey, let's bring this detail out.
Yeah,
because that's really what it's about. Here's the problem. One of the problems, and there are so many of them. I won't go to a class that has a quarterly, and if anybody that makes a decision about whether they use quarterlies or not will listen to me, I will chew their ear off. But here's one problem that quarterlies will get you, and this is where teachers need to be mentored about how they teach. They don't just need to. I don't care how long they've been at a church. I don't care how long they've been a Christian. I don't care how sincere they are.
I was gonna kind of mention that earlier, is that when we talk about this kind of teaching and stuff like that, we're not necessarily just talking, when we say a seasoned Christian, we're not necessarily just talking about someone who's 70 years old or 60 or 50. We're not necessarily talking about age, because Paul talks about it in Timothy. He says, do not let them discredit you simply because of your age. Now, again, I may be misquoting that, but, that's what Paul's telling him, is basically telling Timothy, do not let them look down on you or say that you don't know what you're talking about simply because of your age. Right. Because, God's going to equip who he equips to do whatever he has called them to do.
But teachers he will equip them. I will, but that does not mean that because somebody agrees to teach a Sunday school class that they will do it in a way that pleases God.
Yeah, and I think that may be partially due to, is that necessarily what God called them to do? Or is he just equipping them because they wanted to do it, and so?
I think it's more of how dedicated they are. Yeah. Whether they're taking this serious, whether they understand how serious it is, and I think that's where a lot of people fail. They and quarterlies play into this. Quarterlies are evil, people. So if a teacher does not understand the gravity of what they are doing, and they get a book and say, I'm going to teach this class, and so they read the book and they say, okay, we're going to bring out the points and teach the lesson they laid out for us.
Yeah.
And they get focused on that as opposed to meeting the needs of the people in the class. Yeah. And I have seen this firsthand. One of the goals that a teacher will have is we've got to get done with the lesson today.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh. I'm not going to dive into that,
Yeah,
but I was about to say, I've seen that before where, someone will ask a question out of pure, genuine need, okay, what about this? I'm really curious. Something that's been weighing on their heart or something like that. You kind of get to it. They ask the question, the teacher, okay. And they give us some little arbitrary answer so they can get back to finish reading. And it's
and I've actually seen this. I've actually been in classes where that exact thing happens. Hey, what about this? Somebody told me this and I just don't understand and I don't know. And they don't necessarily go on and say, and I really need to know the answer to this. This is something that is critical in my life right now. They don't necessarily say that, but the teacher should be able to pick up on that. And what I've seen teachers do, well, we need to get back on the lesson and totally ignore. So they've got these people that have been in Sunday school for 40 years that have heard this lesson 10 times or more, but it's more important to finish the lesson than it is to address the concern that the person that's been through this 10 times said, hey, I need an answer to this.
Yeah.
And
they've gotten more concerned with checking the box of the lesson rather than trying to be able to meet the needs of the person.
And I want to, that's a real good segue into something that I want to talk about. Big churches versus little churches.
Yep.
Now
I just want a clarifying question. When we say big churches, are we talking like mega churches,
No,
like Joel Osteen, or are we just
talking
talking like what congregation number?
What I'm talking about is in Greene County. In
Central,
Greene County,
Harvest, Nettleton, kind of.
right? Those are
Rock,
big. Those are
bigger,
big churches.
200 to 700 to 1,000, depending.
1,500.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah, those are what I'm calling big churches.
So what do we consider in a small
Here's
church?
what I'm small 200, 300 less.
Okay.
Here's going to be the way. Instead of doing it by congregation number or attendance number, here's the way I would rather do this because this is kind of my point. If a church is so small that they have a pastor and a secretary and a treasurer and some Sunday school teachers, and that's basically all they have on staff, that's a small church.
Okay.
Whereas a large church will have a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pastors.
I'm about to say
that have different.
Yeah, we have a senior pastor, an associate pastor, which is also our children's pastor. We have a youth pastor. We have a missions pastor. We have an outreach pastor, and we have a small groups pastor.
So how many do y'all have on an average Sunday morning?
Average Sunday morning per service, it varies. First service, we can have anywhere between like 50 to 75, and second service can be anywhere between 100 and 150.
So 250 maybe.
Yeah, 250.
Okay.
Yeah.
That to me
that's why I was asking.
Has a lot of the characteristics of a large church, but that's a small number of people.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, rather unique. I can't swear to that.
Southside used to be a very large church. Like it was cram-packed from beginning to end. And then a lot of people left and went to, I'm not going to name names because I'm just going to get into stuff. But anyway, a lot of people left and went to another church because of a pastor and then went to this church. So it kind of split off and then grew other churches. And we hadn't just started dwindling down and kept dwindling.
Right.
We just got smaller and now we've kind of gotten a little bit bigger and we just kind of staying where we're at more or less.
So y'all have kind of done the grow and multiply thing like classes are supposed to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Most smaller, what I would call smaller churches, which is for the most part where I have been. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we left one church unexpectedly at one time. My wife and I, close to 20 years ago. It's not been that long. First words out of her mouth were, "I'm not going to First Baptist Church." And all she meant, she didn't know anybody at First Baptist. I don't think had ever laid eyes on First Baptist. She just was saying, "I'm not going to the big church in town." And so we went a couple of places. You'll never believe where we wound up. Yep. We wound up at First Baptist Church. And we were very happy there for a lot of reasons for some time. The last time we left a small church, it was a small church. And the first words I think my wife said is, I don't want to go to a big church. And I kind of said something, and that's been 3 years ago, I guess. I kind of said, yeah, I kind of think the same thing. And where do we wind up?
One of the biggest
churches around here. And in that, this is one of the things I told you, sometime we'll talk about the churches that I've been to over the course of my life and what I've learned every time we left one. And the thing that I learned when we went to Nettleton is that there is such a thing as big church bias in small churches. Small churches love to say, you don't want to go to a big church because they're all about the show. They're all about just getting people. They're all about all of these bad things. And a lot of them are. Mm-hmm. I'll call Joel Osteen out. That ain't the place you need to be going. It's huge, but not for the right reasons.
Yeah.
But that
Kenneth Copeland, same way, you know.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean local churches are that way.
Yeah.
And you have to
sometimes you have to look at it that there's a reason they've grown.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And you've got to look, just like you have to look at every individual as a person, as an individual, you need to look at every church as an individual church.
Yeah.
And you are going to find no perfect church, because church are made up of people.
And people are very
broken.
Imperfect.
Exactly. They are broken people. Churches are broken. The thing that I learned, other than the small church has a bias against big church, and I think out of a protection mechanism for themselves.
What I was going to say is
they convey that to their members.
A lot of times people are leaving the small churches due to a sense of fellowship and wanting. And the reason I say that is because personally, for my wife and I, before we went to Southside, I've been to Southside since I was 12 years old. And we left not long before COVID hit. So around 2018, somewhere under there. And, during the time, they were a big church, but they didn't have a ton of pastoral team and things like that. I mean, they were averaging 300-400 people per service almost, 200 to 300 people per service. And it was a lot for our auditorium only fits 400 people max,
right.
Before the fire department kicks them out. And so they were big, they were busy, and, we left, and we were living in our own sinful times and stuff like that. But one of the things that kind of got under our skin was no one reached out to us. No one said, hey, we hadn't seen you in a while. And so we decided, you know what? We're going to a small church because we want to know everybody. And so we went to a small church for a little while, and we noticed very quickly that just because it's small doesn't mean you're going to know everybody, and doesn't mean you're going to be buddies with everybody. Right. That's not the key.
That's because there are people in there like me that, man, I'm glad nobody called and said they missed me.
I know.
I'm the opposite of that. I hate, this may be wrong of me, and this is the one thing about COVID that I appreciate.
Oh my gosh.
I hate stand up and shake hands with everybody. And you might not know it seeing me here, I don't know, but I am I don't think I'm a sociopath, but I am very antisocial.
You're very introverted.
I'm very introverted compared to what you're
Compared to what you see here, this is not how he typically acts.
Right.
Let's put it that way. But, my wife and I were at that church, and we were like, man, it just didn't feel right. And so we decided, I looked at her one day, I said, look, we have to come to the understanding that everyone is flawed. We made our mistakes. People at Southside could make their mistakes. Whatever we think it might be, why don't we give it another shot? As soon as we walked in the doors, one of the people that we had known forever, oh, it's so good to see you. I hadn't seen you so long, gave us a hug. And it was that immediate welcoming and family. And we were like, it wasn't the size of the church that got us.
Right.
It was, and I said the same thing to my wife. I said, well, why didn't we ever reach out and say, hey, we feel this or that or whatever? And I think a lot of people are leaving small churches because some small churches have gotten so focused on the number of people in the congregation, they haven't seen the people in the congregation.
Well, bring me back to small churches and complaining about them in just a second.
I will definitely bring you back to complaints.
Let's stop for just a minute and understand. I want everybody to understand we are not complaining now, and I hope never are complaining about churches to complain about churches.
No,
We are complaining about churches to help churches, pastors.
Yeah, our complaints for churches come from a biblical understanding of what a church is and what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. To a sense, it's a very kind of a broad term. But what we hate to see is is an entity like this that's supposed to be there to help the body of Christ completely failing at their job.
Well, and if they're not doing that, and someone like us doesn't stand up and say these things in a helpful, constructive criticism type way, calling them back to what they should be doing, or making them think about, that might apply to me. Mm-hmm. Nothing is going to change. They're just going to continue the way they are. And I believe that every church can improve.
Southside can improve. Nettleton can improve. Every church has improvements in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. And yet, there's a lot of things that we also are going to complain. I'm complaining about quarterlies. And I'm going to complain a lot about the educational system within churches. And it's not any one person's fault. And as long as I keep my mouth shut, it's absolutely as much my fault as it is anybody's fault.
Yeah. And I mean, my big stance is the lack of relationship and fellowship within the church.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be my kind of big argument back and forth. And like you said, if I stay quiet about it, it's just as much my fault as anyone else's fault.
That is a really hard one.
It is a hard one.
It really is. We went to Nettleton, I don't know, for a year and a half, maybe 2 years before we joined the church.
It was a good little bit before I heard you had joined.
And, I'll have to dig into this and maybe I'll listen to some other people, argue back and forth on this. But through some of the things that I've been through in churches, I came recently to the understanding with myself that I don't know that I know where in Scripture it tells us that we have to be the member of a church.
Yeah.
Paul says, do not forsake the gathering together of yourself as the manner of some is. I believe that we are instructed to support our pastors. I believe we are called to support the church. I believe we are called to tithe. Mm-hmm. I believe a lot of things like that related to that. I don't know that membership in a church. I mean, you look in Acts where everybody gets the local New Testament church. I don't see membership.
I was about to say that's something that you have to break down though. Is what is church? In terms of church, it's the body of believers. It's where you gather. It's where you gather. But
there's also the local New Testament church, and I totally get that, and I agree with that.
And I think that's why we don't see where Paul says you have to be a member, or where anybody says you have to be a member, because that wasn't the purpose of church. Right. It wasn't so you had allegiance to one thing or another. It was purely that of set up a place where you can gather with fellow believers to fellowship, to learn, to grow one another, to help one another through their struggles, and to be able to help the other fellow Christian throughout whichever season in their life they are.
Yeah, and I'm not in any way advocating that you don't need to go to church. I'm not advocating that you can start your own church by staying home and doing something.
Yeah. We're not trying to start a church.
We're not trying to start a church here. That's in no way the point. But I don't remember what the point was, and I really wanted to make it.
I mean, I think it.
So.
Do you remember it?
I think. fellowship in a church is really hard.
Yeah.
My wife. So I was telling you that we went about 2 years before joining, and my wife kind of, I want to join the church. I want to join the church. Her reason for wanting to join the church was that she wanted to help. She wanted to be involved in activities. She served in the nursery last Sunday, and a time before that. And I get that, and I wanted to serve too.
But why do you have to be a member to serve?
Well, no, I don't have a problem with that. If you are going to serve in, and I actually had this discussion with the pastor there, and basically said there are a few places that non-members can serve. There's a lot more places that members can serve. There are some places that members have to be background checked, obviously, to
children,
serve.
Things like that.
Yeah. And so, no, I totally get that. In fact, I had a funny conversation with a coworker that shall remain nameless at the moment about.
Until they hear this.
Well, yeah, they'll out themselves maybe. But I had this argument for a while with a person who's actually a Methodist, who I think they have members too. But he thought anybody ought to just be able to go to a church and be a member of the church. That the church should not vote on accepting a person as a member. And the argument that I gave him that made sense to him in his odd way was, okay, so we've got a church here with 50 members. They've got $200,000 in the bank, which they should not have. Another question or another subject, but they've got $200,000 in the bank. This biker group comes in with 100 people and walks in and says, we want to be members of the church, and you sign them up. All right. The next business meeting, they get up, one of them gets up and says, I make a motion that we dissolve the church and draw the money out and divide it up again, amongst the members. I second that. Okay, let's vote. You got 100 for, 50 against. And that finally made sense to him that, okay, yeah, you've got to some way control who's in your congregation. Now, the real answer to that is a group of believers does not need to take as members one that they know is an unbeliever, two, anyone that they know that is adversarial or trying to make trouble or going to make trouble, and three, anyone that does not believe as they believe. And the church is supposed to be a example of Christ. We're supposed to show Christ through us. And you can't show Christ correctly by having someone that is willfully living in sin. Yeah. And the church can certainly not be Christ-like or show a Christ-centeredness by okaying and condoning or allowing. And here's a criticism of church. In my 60 years, to my knowledge, I know of one instance, or maybe there was two at the same time, of church discipline being actually practiced. And
so are you talking about the 1 Corinthians, that kind of church discipline where someone was there and willfully sinning, saying it was okay, and the church said, no, we've got to...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now, the sin was not like adultery, which is what is most common maybe. So the Greene County podcast, that's what this podcast is called. We decided on that name for a couple of reasons, because we're in Greene County, Arkansas. We want to share the gospel. We want to help people grow. And the rubber hits the road for those people for the most part to begin with. in Greene County, Arkansas.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason for the name.
Yeah, and I mean it's just me, Bob, and we have a AV tech and cameraman back here. His name's Ethan. It's just us three doing this out of the conviction that we have.
And all three of us have the conviction, and Ethan is a little more than an AV guy. He's adding to this behind the scenes in
he
ways.
is. He's coming up with great questions. He's being able to give us thoughtful insight, and really he's also being able to give us encouragement throughout this.
Our core goals here are to proclaim the gospel, and hopefully you will hear us one way or another give a presentation of the gospel almost every episode. We want to encourage unbelievers to learn about faith in Jesus. This podcast is not just for Christians. It's not just for believers.
No, it is very much catered to unbelievers and believers alike. We want to make that very clear that our goal is not just to teach the people who have already heard Jesus, who have already decided to make a stance for him. Our goal is also to be able to proclaim the gospel and to encourage unbelievers to step out on faith and to learn, to seek that knowledge, to be able to come to the understanding that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life.
And while there will be a lot of scripture that you'll hear here, there'll be a lot of God talk here and a lot of church talk. That's not all we're going to do, because this is Greene County podcast. And so we're going to talk about issues that happen in Greene County, Craighead County, maybe
a little.
Maybe Arkansas and the United States and the world. We'll get to all of those in some time, but we're going to center on our little area. And so it's not all going to be about church. Now, what we bring to this and the views that we have on this are always going to be, hopefully always, from a Christian, from a biblical worldview.
That is our goal.
Yes.
Is that everything that we say or do, we are backing up with our understanding of Scripture.
Right.
That's not to say that we're going to get it right 100% of the time. We are human. We fail. And that's something we want our audience to do, is to be able to hold us accountable. We want to encourage you to, anytime we say something or we make a stance or we make a comment, we want you to be able to go to the Scripture, and if we're wrong, point it out.
Absolutely, and that's actually one of our scriptures of inspiration that we have. We'll read both of those here as soon as we get through this little list, and explain to you or confirm to you that we are not God, and we know we're not, or
we understand that we're not. Yeah. We have come to that understanding because we've tried to be our own gods, and it has always failed.
That's true, and I want to back up and say that right. God is God, and we are not God. Yeah. And we understand that. We want you to know that everything that we say, we're going to say with conviction. We're not going to say it unless we believe it, but that does not mean that we are always right. And we want to be held accountable. Again, the scripture we'll share in a moment will reinforce that. We want to encourage growth through the study of Scripture and fellowship. Mm-hmm. We want to share a biblical worldview of all things, and we want to promote a culture of life.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on that biblical worldview. We will probably get into, at times, a little bit of politics or some sense of moralities or history or things like that. But every time we go to any topic whatsoever, it is purely through the biblical lens.
We have two scriptures of inspiration for this podcast overall. The first one we will talk about today is the one that answers the question of why are we doing this. In Romans 1:14 through 16, Paul says,
I am the debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the unwise. So as much as in me is, I am ready to preach the gospel to you that are at Rome also. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to every one that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Now, some translations do say, instead of Greek, say Gentile, and I think that's just to kind of clarify the fact that Paul's talking to everyone.
Everybody.
Yeah.
That's all. Paul was talking to Romans, and that's how they viewed the world. So those are the words.
They were the center of the world to themselves. So
and I kind of threw Ben off by using the King James here, and I did that on purpose because I like the word debtor. He says, "I am debtor," both to the Greeks and to the barbarians. And what he's saying, because God has forgiven me, I have a debt to every other person that I can reach to share with them the gospel.
Yeah.
And that the podcast as a group, each one of us individually, I believe, carries that debt and has that burden that we want to share that. So as much as we can, we are going to share the gospel of Christ.
Yeah, because we understand what it is to be lost. We understand how you feel when you're lost, and we understand the torment that it can play on you, and we don't want that for anyone. So we understand the freedom that Christ has given us and the love that He has shown us, and we want that for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our second scripture of inspiration exemplifies who we want to be and who we want to help our listeners become. It's in Acts 17:10-11. Paul has been prevented from teaching and has been run out of Thessalonica. He's now in Berea.
And so it says, the brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea, and when they arrived, they went into the Jewish synagogue. Now those Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so.
Now, the thing we really want to take away from this, it's great that they received the word, they listened to the preaching with all eagerness. That's great. But they followed it up by reading and examining the scriptures to see if they were true.
Yeah.
And Paul is the one writing this. He's the one preaching, and he's also the one commending them that they checked up on him.
Yeah.
And we want you to check up on us. In fact, anything that you hear, see, read, or think needs to be compared to Scripture to find out whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
Scripture, God's Word, is the final arbiter of right and wrong, period. And that's how we're going to try to treat it here on this podcast.
Yeah. So we've kind of gone over who we are, what's our background, we've kind of touched on a lot of things. Our first episode was focused on the podcast itself and describing it and kind of expounding upon it. The second episode, we're really hoping kind of expounds upon us in more of a personal level. And, we want you to understand that when we do this, we're going to try to do it about once a week. We're going to have it uploaded at least once a week. We're going to be having it on every media that we can find, such as YouTube and Spotify. I think we might have some later on coming down the line that we can get going out. And we really want feedback from our audience.
Absolutely. Feedback is key to this, please. Yeah.
So, if anybody has any questions or comments or, snide remarks, whatever it may be, you can easily reach us by email at info@greenecountypodcast.com, and that's Greene with an extra E, so it's Greene countypodcast.com. And we want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we hope that you continue to join us on our quest to learn and explore. And you can find us on Facebook at Greene County Podcast page. I believe our YouTube is under the same name. Is that true, Ethan?
That's correct.
Yeah, so our YouTube is also under the same page of Greene County Podcast. So, keep a lookout for it in the future as we continue to dive into more and more topics, and we continue to learn.
Thank you.
Thank you.